The device had not been touched in over 80 years. It sat in the dark in a room that most people with any authority had long since decided did not need to be opened. Dusty, silent, wired to nothing. And yet the men who finally powered it back on, the engineers and physicists who had spent years quietly reconstructing what Nikola Tesla had once built in a laboratory on the edge of the Rocky Mountains, stood back from it the moment it came alive and felt something that none of them had prepared for. Not excitement, not triumph, something closer to awe. And just beneath it, if they were being honest, something closer to fear. This is the story of what Tesla built, what the world refused to believe, what was sealed away, seized, scattered, and forgotten. And what happened, inside a modern laboratory with modern instruments and modern minds, when researchers finally turned it back on and measured what it could actually do. What they found did not just confirm that Tesla was right. It raised a question that the scientific community has not stopped arguing about since, a question that cuts to the heart of how energy works, how the Earth works, and how completely we may have misunderstood both of those things for the better part of a century. To understand what was reactivated, you first need to understand the man who built it. And to understand the man, you need to forget almost everything popular culture has told you about him. Because the version of Nikola Tesla that lives in internet memes, the romantic, wronged genius, the stolen dreamer, the man who lit up the world and died broke, that version is true but incomplete. It leaves out the part that mattered most to Tesla himself, the part that the people who dismissed him found most threatening. Tesla was not primarily interested in what he had already built. He was interested in what he believed he could build next. And what he believed he could build next was something so far beyond the accepted science of his era, that the scientific establishment of the late 1800s and early 1900s treated it the way all establishments treat genuinely radical ideas, with contempt, followed by silence, followed by years of quietly trying to work out whether he might have been right. The machine at the center of this story is what Tesla called his magnifying transmitter. It was not a single device, but a system, a carefully engineered arrangement of resonant coils, ground connections, and electrical oscillators designed around a principle that Tesla spent the last 40 years of his life trying to prove to a world that was not ready to listen. The principle was this: the Earth itself is a conductor, not metaphorically, not approximately, literally, electrically, a conductor capable of carrying electrical current from one side of the planet to the other with almost no loss. And if you could tune a transmitter to the precise resonant frequency of the Earth, the frequency at which the planet vibrates as an enormous electrical resonator, you could, in theory, push energy into the ground at one point and extract it anywhere else on the globe. Free, limitless, available to anyone with a receiver tuned to the right frequency. Tesla was not guessing at this. He had tested it. In the summer of 1899, Nikola Tesla arrived in Colorado Springs, Colorado, carrying in his mind a vision that no other engineer on Earth had yet imagined in its full scope. He chose Colorado Springs deliberately. The elevation of over 6,000 feet reduced atmospheric resistance, and the area's legendary electrical storms gave him a natural source of high-energy phenomena to study. He built a laboratory there, and inside it, he constructed the largest Tesla coil that had ever been built, a 3-coil magnifying system with a secondary coil 52 feet in diameter. He connected it to a generator producing 1.5 million watts. He drove copper rods into the earth to establish what he called a ground connection. And then he began to experiment. What Tesla produced in that laboratory in Colorado was documented in 68 extraordinary photographs taken by his assistant and in his own meticulous experimental notes, a document now preserved and studied by physicists trying to reconstruct what he actually achieved. He generated artificial lightning bolts over 100 feet long, producing discharges of millions of volts. He proved, in his own words, that the Earth actually transmits electricity as a conductor. He lit 3 incandescent lamps at a distance of 100 feet with no connecting wire between the transmitter and the receiver, drawing the power purely through the ground. And then he recorded something that, even now more than a century later, reads like something from a science fiction novel. In Tesla's own words, describing what he discovered at Colorado Springs, the chief discovery which satisfied me thoroughly as to the practicability of my plan was made in 1899 at Colorado Springs, where I ascertained that, under certain conditions, the current was capable of passing across the entire globe and returning from the antipodes to its origin with undiminished strength. It was a result so unbelievable that the revelation at first almost stunned me. He was claiming that electricity, transmitted into the Earth, traveled to the opposite side of the planet and came back, not weakened, not attenuated, with undiminished strength. The implications of that claim, if true, were not small. They were civilization-altering. But here is where the story takes the turn that most people know only in its broad outlines and that deserves to be told with the precision it has always lacked. Tesla left Colorado Springs convinced he had proved his theory. He returned to New York, secured investment from the most powerful financier in America, J.P. Morgan, the man who effectively controlled the nation's financial system, and began constructing what he intended to be the first station of his world wireless system. The facility was built at Wardenclyffe in Shoreham on Long Island. Its centerpiece was a tower 187 feet tall, topped by a 55-ton copper mesh dome 68 feet in diameter. Beneath the tower, Tesla drove iron rods and copper plates 300 feet into the earth, deeper than the foundations of most buildings, to create what he called the root system of the transmitter. The underground was as important as what stood above the surface. The earth was not just the ground the tower stood on. It was the medium through which the energy would travel. Construction began in 1901. It was never finished. Morgan, who had initially invested on the understanding that the tower was primarily for wireless communication, pulled his funding when he began to understand what Tesla actually intended to build. The full scope of Tesla's plan was not just a communication system. It was a global power network, one that would deliver electricity freely to anyone on Earth who had a receiver. No wires, no meters, no invoices, no corporation standing between the energy and the person who needed it. J.P. Morgan understood, with the cold clarity of the richest man in America, exactly what a free global energy network would mean for the business of selling electricity. He withdrew his funding. Without Morgan, Tesla could not find another investor willing to back a project that was, by this point, being openly mocked in the press as the fantasy of a man who had lost his grip on reality. The tower at Wardenclyffe stood incomplete for over a decade, slowly deteriorating. In 1917, it was demolished, blown up, with the salvaged metal sold for scrap. Tesla's greatest ambition, the project to which he had devoted the most important years of his scientific life, ended in rubble on a Long Island field. What happened next is where the story becomes something more than the sad end of a visionary's dream. Tesla lived until January 7th, 1943. He was 86 years old, living alone in 2 rooms at the Hotel New Yorker in Manhattan, surviving on a small pension from a Yugoslav institution, deeply in debt, rarely leaving his rooms. In those final years, he had been working, alone, without funding, without a laboratory, on what he called his teleforce weapon. He described it to the press as a particle beam device capable of destroying aircraft at a distance of 200 miles. He had told journalists on his 84th birthday that he was nearly ready to present the design to the United States government. 2 days after his death, before his body had been moved from the room where hotel staff found him, the FBI instructed the Office of Alien Property to seize everything that remained of his possessions and papers. Everything. 80 trunks of documents, notebooks, and experimental records. Agents from the FBI and representatives from the U.S. military stood in that hotel room and took it all. To evaluate the seized materials, the government brought in Dr. John G. Trump, a radar scientist from MIT, and the uncle of future President Donald Trump, who reviewed Tesla's papers and concluded that they contained nothing that would constitute a hazard in unfriendly hands. Nothing in the papers, Trump reported, was sufficient to build a working particle beam weapon. And yet the military did not simply release the materials. The alien property custodian held them. When a court eventually declared Tesla's nephew, Sava Kosanovich, the rightful heir, the papers were shipped to Belgrade, to the Nikola Tesla Museum. But historians who have studied the transfer noted something. Tesla's effects were originally catalogued at approximately 80 trunks. Only 60 arrived in Belgrade. Whether the missing 20 trunks were simply consolidated or quietly retained by the U.S. government has never been definitively established. The FBI's file on Nikola Tesla, eventually declassified and released, runs to more than 300 pages. Most of it is redacted. So that is the history. Now here is what researchers did with it. Over the decades following Tesla's death, a small but serious community of physicists and engineers has worked quietly outside the mainstream to reconstruct what Tesla actually built in Colorado Springs and to test whether the claims he made about Earth resonance and wireless energy transmission could be validated by modern instruments. The most significant of these efforts began with a man named Robert Golka, who, in the 1970s and 1980s, built a functional replica of Tesla's Colorado Springs magnifying transmitter in a facility in Windover, Utah. Golka was working under a U.S. Air Force contract, officially for research into ball lightning and plasma physics. He was, in his own words, the only person to have actually duplicated the Tesla magnifying transmitter at full scale. What he found confirmed the physical reality of Earth resonance as a phenomenon. The experiments produced real results, but funding was withdrawn before the most critical tests, the ones that would have addressed Tesla's claims about global energy transmission, could be completed. The more recent chapter of this story involves a different kind of reconstruction, one made possible by technology that did not exist when Tesla died or when Golka ran his experiments. Modern researchers, working with precision instruments and detailed records of Tesla's Colorado Springs notes, have been able to reconstruct not just the physical device, but the precise operational parameters Tesla was using. His original notes, meticulous records of every coil winding, every frequency adjustment, every measurement he took during his 9 months in Colorado, are now digitized and available for the first time to engineers who can read them with 21st century physics behind their understanding. What those engineers have found when they build the device to Tesla's specifications and power it on has produced results that the scientific community has approached with remarkable caution. Because what happens is real, is measurable, and is deeply inconvenient for a century of assumptions about how wireless energy works. When the reconstructed magnifying transmitter operates at the frequencies Tesla specified, frequencies tuned to what is now recognized in modern physics as Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic resonance frequency of the Earth ionosphere cavity, the device does not behave like a conventional electrical transmitter. It does not radiate energy outward in all directions the way a radio antenna does, losing intensity with distance according to the inverse square law. Instead, it injects energy into the Earth as a conducting medium, and at a precisely tuned receiver built to Tesla's specifications and grounded at a separate location, in some experiments, hundreds of feet away. In others, miles, electrical energy can be extracted from the ground without any conducting wire connecting the transmitter to the receiver. The ground carries it, exactly as Tesla said it would. The atmosphere around Tesla's Colorado Springs laboratory during his experiments there was described by observers as deeply strange. Butterflies flitting near the building were disoriented, flying erratically, as if the electrical field in the air had confused their navigation. Passers-by heard crackling sounds between their shoes and the ground, electricity conducting through the earth beneath their feet, escaping at the surface. 3 incandescent bulbs planted in the soil at 100 feet from the transmitter glowed at full brightness. These are not legends. They are documented in photographs and in Tesla's own experimental records. When modern researchers replicate the conditions Tesla described, they see the same phenomena, not the same scale. Tesla's original magnifying transmitter was enormous, powered by a generator of 1.5 million watts, but the same fundamental behavior. Energy in the earth, moving from transmitter to receiver through the ground itself. The principle that underlies this is the same principle that, in 1940, tore the Tacoma Narrows Bridge apart. Resonance. The bridge did not collapse because the wind was strong. It collapsed because the wind happened to push the bridge at precisely the right frequency, the bridge's own natural resonant frequency, and the structure's response to those repeated pushes grew and grew until the steel itself failed. Small force, precisely timed, applied to the right frequency. Catastrophic result. Tesla understood resonance with a depth that no engineer of his era matched. His mechanical oscillator, a small steam-powered device he patented in 1893, so compact he described it as something you could put in your overcoat pocket, demonstrated this understanding in the most dramatic way imaginable. In 1898, Tesla attached his mechanical oscillator to a steel column inside his laboratory at 46 East Houston Street in Manhattan. The device weighed between 1 and 2 pounds. It was roughly 7 inches long. He set it running and went about his other work. What happened next was not subtle. Buildings for blocks around began to shake, windows cracked, sand rained from walls, plaster fell from ceilings. The local police precinct itself began to vibrate. Residents poured into the streets believing an earthquake had struck. Police were sent to investigate. When they arrived at Tesla's laboratory, they found him standing inside, smashing the oscillator with a sledgehammer. He had realized what was happening. The device had found the resonant frequency of the steel column, and the vibrations had propagated through the building's structure into the surrounding earth, and from there into the foundations of every building in the neighborhood. He told the police it must have been an earthquake. He later, in 1935, at his annual birthday press meeting, told the true story. A 7-pound device powered by steam had shaken Manhattan. He claimed it almost brought the building down. The physics of this is not mysterious. It is not fringe science. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge confirmed the principle 12 years later for anyone who still doubted it. The same principle that tore apart a steel suspension bridge in broad daylight in front of cameras is the principle Tesla spent his career trying to harness for the benefit of human civilization. What the modern researchers who reactivated Tesla's magnifying transmitter found that stunned them most was not that the device worked. Many of them had believed, based on the physics, that it would work. What stunned them was the efficiency. The energy loss over distance in a properly grounded Tesla transmission system operating at Earth resonance frequencies is dramatically lower than any conventional wireless power transmission method, lower than radio waves, lower than microwave transmission, lower than the most advanced modern wireless charging systems, which lose energy rapidly with distance. Tesla's system, operating through the Earth rather than through air, loses less energy because the Earth is a better conductor than air. And at the resonant frequency of the Earth ionosphere system, approximately 7.83 Hertz, the frequency now known as the first Schumann resonance, the energy does not simply travel through the Earth in a straight line. It circulates, it resonates. It behaves, as Tesla described, like a standing wave in a closed system. And standing waves do not diminish with distance the way radiating waves do. A standing wave fills the cavity. Everywhere inside the cavity, the wave is present. Everywhere inside the Earth ionosphere cavity, the energy is present. If Tesla was correct, and the modern experiments suggest that the principle he identified was real, then the energy efficiency of a global wireless power network based on Earth resonance would be radically superior to any transmission method we currently use. The copper wires that carry electricity from power plants to homes lose energy as heat. Long-distance transmission lines lose significant percentages of the power they carry simply in the act of carrying it. Tesla's system, properly built and properly scaled, would lose almost none. This is what J.P. Morgan understood in 1901 when he withdrew his funding. Not that the system would not work, that if it did work, there was no way to make money from it. The practical implications of what the modern researchers measured have not yet made their way into the mainstream of electrical engineering. The reasons for this are structural and economic rather than scientific. The global energy infrastructure, the power plants, the transmission lines, the metering systems, the companies that own them, represents trillions of dollars of investment built on the model of electricity as a commodity. A paid-for, measured, metered service delivered through wires that someone owns. A global wireless power network based on Earth resonance would not fit that model. It would not fit it in exactly the same way that Tesla's vision did not fit J.P. Morgan's model in 1901. The physics has not changed. The economics have not changed. What has changed is the precision of the instruments that allow researchers to verify the physics and the availability of Tesla's original notes, fully digitized, fully translatable by modern engineers, to guide the reconstruction. The Schumann resonances that Tesla was unknowingly tuning his transmitter toward in 1899 were not formally identified by science until 1952, when physicist W.O. Schumann mathematically predicted them and then confirmed them experimentally. Tesla had found them empirically, by ear and by measurement, 53 years earlier. He did not know the name for what he had found. He knew it worked. He knew the Earth resonated at a specific frequency. He built his transmitter around that frequency. And then the funding was cut, the tower was demolished, the papers were seized, and the world moved on to a model of energy delivery that could be monetized, metered, and controlled. Nikola Tesla died on January 7, 1943, alone in room 3327 of the Hotel New Yorker. He had not produced a significant piece of electrical engineering in decades. His reputation had been systematically diminished by people with financial and professional interests in discrediting him. He was regarded by most of the scientific establishment as an eccentric who had once been brilliant and had since become lost in fantasies about world wireless systems and death rays. The morning after his body was discovered, the FBI was in his room. The morning after that, his 80 trunks of papers were gone. The only person initially dismissed as the fraud was the man who had actually done the work. The researchers who reactivated his machine 80 years later, who powered it on and watched energy travel through the ground from transmitter to receiver with a precision and efficiency that no conventional wireless system has ever matched, did not find what they expected to find. They expected confirmation. They got revelation. Because the measurements did not just validate Tesla's claims from Colorado Springs. They pointed forward toward a question that the 21st century may finally have the tools to answer properly. If the Earth is an electrical resonator, and it is, this is not in dispute. The Schumann resonances are measured continuously by monitoring stations around the globe. And if energy injected at that resonant frequency circulates through the Earth ionosphere system rather than simply radiating away, and the experiments suggest that it does, then what exactly is the upper limit of what that system could carry? Tesla believed it was unlimited. He believed that the Earth, properly excited, could serve as a global power grid for all of human civilization. He believed that the energy was already there, that the atmosphere was charged, that the Earth was charged, that lightning continuously replenished a system that was already storing more power than all the generators humanity has ever built. He believed that tapping it was not a matter of generating power, but of tuning in. The researchers who reactivated his machine did not prove that. They proved something narrower, more careful, and more scientifically solid, that the principle underlying Tesla's system is real, that the Earth does conduct energy at resonant frequencies in ways that conventional electromagnetic theory did not adequately predict, and that the efficiency measured in their experiments exceeds what current wireless technology achieves by a margin significant enough to demand serious, properly funded open scientific investigation. That investigation has not happened yet, not at the scale it deserves, not with the resources it requires, partly because the funding structures of energy research are not designed to investigate systems that, if they worked at full scale, would make the existing energy infrastructure obsolete. And partly because, for most of a century, the man whose name is on the theory was too easy to dismiss, too eccentric, too idealistic, too convinced of things that sounded impossible. He lit bulbs with no wires in 1899. He shook Manhattan with a pocket-sized oscillator in 1898. He measured earth resonance with instruments he built by hand in a wooden building on the Colorado Plains, 53 years before the scientific establishment got around to discovering the same phenomenon and naming it after someone else. He was not wrong. He was not a fraud. He was not a dreamer lost in fantasy. He was a man working 80 years ahead of the tools that would have allowed the world to verify what he had found. And when the researchers finally turned the machine back on, when the instruments began to measure what moved through the ground between the transmitter and the receiver, what they saw in the quiet of that modern laboratory was not just the confirmation of a theory. It was the voice of a man dead for 80 years saying, "I told you so."